What better way to end a conference at 2 some in the afternoon than talking about data? Thank you. So I'll let folks get settled here. My name is Gilbert Klein. I'm the director of Away Home America. And I'm excited to share with you, really welcome you to this table of nerds. So welcome all of you into the geek table in your local high school lunchroom. And we are going to just get real about really how to implement, I don't think this is too much of a stretch, how to implement everything you've learned over the last day and a half. It all hinges on data, spoiler alert. So you are about to hear from a couple of nerds, myself included. And here's why you should care, especially, I know you're dragging, it's the end of a full 2 days, but here's why you should care this afternoon about the things that we're about to share with you. The first thing and the first reason that you should care and pay attention is that you care about equity. You know that young people of color and LGBTQ youth are the young people most likely to experience homelessness. So that's reason number one. 2 is that you probably also know that the systems and supports that we have funded across this country to address youth homelessness do not center the experiences of LGBT youth and youth of color, in the main. So we know that young people today who might make it out of that experience of homelessness, who are LGBTQ youth or youth of color or both, do so in spite of the services sometimes that are there to address that situation, not because of them. Thank you. You may also know that data is a critical strategy to changing that. So this is why you should care about what we're just about to share with you. One last reason is that we are in a position across this country where we are coming together as in a movement to put all of our voices together to advocate for the resources at scale that are needed to effectively end youth homelessness. It's pretty nerdy, so breaking that down, what that means is that if we are successful in coming together as a movement, the federal government would pull a lot more money into ending youth homelessness, and your communities will get a lot of that money. But if you feel that what you're currently funding in your community, the interventions that you have in your community, may not be serving young people of color and LGBTQ youth as well, so you might have just questions about that, or you might have experiences in your young adult shelter where young people of color, African-American young men, are being barred from shelter at rates higher than their peers. You might be seeing that. You might also wonder if queer and trans young people are doing as well in your housing programs as their straight and cis peers. You might just have questions. If we don't have data that actually documents what you might know, given your experience, your lived experience, your practice experience, when we get to a point where the federal government is scaling up resources, you're going to get a whole lot more of those programs and supports that you think are not working very well right now. So that's why data is so critical for all of us in this movement. What you're going to hear from, who you're going to hear from next. First, you're going to hear from the geekiest of the geeks, Jake McGuire, from Built for Zero, about all of the work that Community Solutions is doing, and it's really wicked smart stuff. You're then going to hear from Allison and Josephine about the Youth Outcomes Project from Many and Chapin Hall. That is going to be game-changing work, and I'm super excited about it. And then I'm going to chime back in with a little bit about the Away Home America Community Dashboard. Spoiler alert, we're going to argue a couple of things. 1, that data is important. 2, that the sharing of data in public and transparent ways is key, and doing that arm in arm with young people. And that there is a way to implement equity, and the way to do that is by using data. So that's what you're going to hear from us.
Hi again, Josephine Popboff with Many, she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm here with my colleague Allison to talk about our Youth Outcomes Project. So I'm just going to talk a little bit, provide some context about how we came to do this project and what we hope to achieve. And then the researcher of the team will really tell you kind of what we're finding. Sound good?
We're all researchers.
Awesome. So a little bit about a year ago when we were scoping out the Youth Outcomes Project, the aim was really to provide back to you in the room, back to the field, back to the movement, really credible, consistent, research-informed, youth-informed, stakeholder-informed outcomes and measures that respond to what we know as the 4 core outcomes. I'll talk a little bit about why I'm using the USICH framework, but it's really what we use to ground ourselves in the scope and the aim of the project. And you can see in the corner where one of the goals of the framework is about improving core outcomes, and it speaks to stable housing, so having safe and reliable housing opportunities for young people. Permanent connection, so that's about connection and attachment to families, to peers, to communities, schools, and any other positive social network that the young person finds valuable for their journey. Well-being, so that speaks to social and mental functioning, right? So that young people are able to thrive and be their best selves. And then education and employment, that we believe that it is important when we do this work that we are supporting the progress, the attainment around employment and education training and earned income. And most RIA providers, runaway and homeless youth providers, are providers working with young people. These are very common outcome areas. And it's important that it's identified in the framework because it speaks to the opportunity to impact both at the organizational and the systems level, how we think about the interventions that we're doing and how it responds to not just what the young person needs in that moment, but systemically, how are we doing on behalf of young people in our community. It's also important because we believe that we are doing right, but the data is what tells us to what extent we're doing right, what gaps we need to fill, how we need to continue to leverage our strengths to continue to respond to the needs of young people. And so we created a scope that really sort of engages the data and the people around us to think about what it means to do that in terms of outcomes and measurements, and how we speak to, on the program level, our theory of change, our alignment with programmatic goals, that it's responsive to what the young people need. And then my favorite part as a systems thinker is how does that information then roll up so that we're moving away from that individual organizational level and thinking as a system, as collaborators, as the collective, what impact are we really having on young people? So Allison's going to share a little bit about what we found.
All right, sounds great. So there's 3 stages to this project. The first stage was to do a systematic review of existing literature as well as the FISBE grant proposals. So we wanted to better understand what outcomes are being measured within those domains that Josephine just talked about, and what are the measurement tools, or what are the different types of assessments that are used to capture those outcomes. So that was the first stage, and we then generated a background report, which we then shared with our steering committee, and then we also shared it with expert consultants who were part of expert consultation focus groups. And these people consisted of youth with lived experiences, service providers, federal agencies, funders, researchers, who all have experience working in this type of work. Or have that lived experience. We also did an online survey for service providers, primarily in rapid rehousing, and those who provide supportive housing, to also get their feedback on these proposed outcomes and measurement tools that we had found through our systematic review. So during our consultation focus groups, we asked everyone to prioritize essentially what outcomes, so outcomes are what you measure, best captured the domains, so education, employment, permanent connection, stable housing, and social emotional well-being. What are the best outcomes that fit those domains? And then the last stage, which we're currently in, is synthesizing all that information. So based on these conversations and the literature review and also our appraisals of the different measurement tools that we found in our review, what are the recommendations that we want to put forth to service providers to take more of that system approach? So here's an example of what we showed during the expert consultation focus groups. So here are the different domains, and you can see we split out employment and education. But these were the different outcomes that were generated from our systematic review. And of course, we can't measure all of these because you can't be measuring, asking hundreds of questions. So we asked our experts to just prioritize which ones really resonate with you, which ones do you think everyone should be collecting data on. And then this is also an example of the measurement tools that were generated from our review. We didn't go into too much of this with the experts, but just to give you a little bit of a preview, when we found a measurement tool We then appraised it based on the 5 different domains. So feasibility, for example, if it has high feasibility, it generally is a measure that doesn't have a lot of items because we can't be asking hundreds of questions. And then also just different types, is it valid, is it reliable tool, because we want to make sure that we're really rooted in evidence-based work. So this is kind of the little preview of the project, and we hope to share these results very soon, which we're really excited about.
It is I, the geekiest of the geeks. Thank you all. Here we go. Okay. So I'm Jake McGuire. I co-direct a national effort called Built for Zero that folks may be familiar with for community solutions, which is where I work. And Built for Zero is an effort of 60 US communities right now that are focused on ending chronic and veteran homelessness. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how we're thinking about data in that initiative. And some of you may be in Built for Zero communities, and you may even see some of your data up here. I don't know. So we'll find out. Before I do that, I love what Josephine and Allison said about adding on top of the importance of really good program level data, the shift to system level data. And I think the reason it feels so important to me is we're here to talk about data, but what is data for, right? Like, why do we care about data? And I'll be honest, I think in the environment we work in, we get really used to thinking about data for compliance, data for reporting. There are so many data obligations that are placed on us that it can be really easy to get away from the idea that the principal reason we care about data is because data helps us improve. And we should be collecting data and using data for improvement. And we maybe shouldn't be spending too much of our time focusing on data that we don't have a plan for how we're going to use to drive improvement in the outcomes that we want to achieve. So on Built for Zero, we're trying to help communities think about this as they make this shift from program level data to system level data. What I mean by that is basically just that in a community, instead of just knowing how well individual programs are doing, what we really want to know is all of that activity adding up then to fewer people experiencing homelessness across this community in the target populations that we're looking at? And I think one of the things we found is when we started trying to help communities shift to being able to think this way, we started to find that there were a lot of communities that had really renowned programs, but their system level data wasn't showing reductions. And then communities that maybe didn't have programs that were that famous or have such a shiny brand, but they were doing things that were allowing those programs to work together in a way that was actually driving reductions across the community, which is the thing we really wanted. So this is Jacksonville's data. It's a little bit old, actually. I should have maybe pulled some more updated data. But you can see this is data that includes every person experiencing chronic homelessness across that community, irrespective of the programs that they're connected to or the services that they're accessing. And you can see that Jacksonville's working to drive that number down over time. Okay, so how do we think about if we make a shift from program level data to system level data? So across the whole community, what are the things that we want to make sure are true so that we can say with some confidence that we're actually looking at a picture of what's really going on across our whole community? And these fall into kind of 4 categories for us. The first is full coverage, which is just what it sounds like. Do we actually have everybody? How do we know we have everybody? Everybody in some kind of program or service setting? Everybody on the street or in a setting where maybe they're not coming in intentionally to interact with service providers? How do we know we actually have a picture of everybody across the whole community? And so our communities have had to do a ton of work to coordinate their outreach, coordinate their service providers, get everybody around the same table. Sometimes this is politics and about relationships to be able to report data into the same place. Is the data person level? What that means is we want to move beyond, I think, where we've been for a long time, which is settling for anonymous or sort of snapshot level data, and move to a place where we actually have a name and an understanding of the experience of each person that we're talking about. So sometimes what I say is you should be able to zoom in on this data to see individual people and what they're going through and what might be appropriate to help them, just as easily as you can zoom out and understand aggregate level trends in your community. So in communities where maybe they have really good data but it's anonymous, we've had to do a lot of work to say, hey, what would it take to make sure you know every person experiencing that kind of homelessness by name? Is the data regularly updated? This is the 4th one there. So as people move through their experience of homelessness, is the data being updated in real time to reflect that? We want communities to be able to pull this kind of number at least once a month. Do you know with certainty everyone experiencing homelessness in these target groups at least once a month, which is a big shift for a lot of communities. And then finally, that third one is the data reliable. And all that means is, does it balance, like your checkbook, right? So if you have a sense of how many people you've got in front of you, and then you've got a sense of how many people came into homelessness that month and how many people exited homelessness that month, what you're left with should be the number of people you can actually count, right? Otherwise, you have a reliability problem. Something's going wrong. So these are the things that we're looking at. The way this boils down is communities are really tracking 6 data points in this way. We break inflow into 3 categories. You can see here, people that are brand new, newly identified, so it's their first experience of homelessness in that community. People that have returned from housing, so they've already been placed into housing or been connected with housing and they've fallen out of housing and come back into the system. And then folks that have returned from inactive, which is maybe we knew about them once, but they really disappeared for a long, long time, and we made efforts enough to find them, and it was long enough that we decided maybe they've moved away, maybe they've self-resolved. If they come back, we'll deal with them again, but for now, we're going to take them off the list. When folks come back, we talk about return from inactive. Then you've got active homelessness. So who's in front of us now that needs some kind of housing assistance? And then outflow. These are folks that are being moved into housing that we know, but also folks that are moving into that inactive list because they've self-resolved or they've moved away or sometimes they've passed away. Whatever the reason, we're going to take them off the list for now. What you get when you start to look at this is a really dynamic month-over-month picture of homelessness. I think this is one of the awesome advantages of shifting to this kind of approach beyond just kind of standard point in time counts, is homelessness is not a phenomenon that people experience once a year. It's a problem that's shifting and changing in real time. And this allows you to see that so you can start to understand, like we're looking at here, are we driving that number down or up over time? I'm going to move on here. This is really the crux of this. When you have this kind of data, it's not worth anything unless it allows you to improve. And so this is what that looks like. We've built these performance management tools for communities. So you can see, again, this is Jacksonville's data. This is on veterans this time. You can see that number going down, but then you can also see some things built into that, right? How do we know that a drop in homelessness is really an improvement, not just kind of standard variation or shifts we'd expect to see in the system? So what we've done here is when we have 3 or more data points in the same direction, those data points light up pink. So community gets a little bit of a signal. Okay, we're seeing something that feels kind of consistent here. We may want to pay attention. When you have 6 or more data points below the median, which is that middle line there, what you're seeing is an indication that you have actually shifted your system. You're beyond variation, and you're actually getting a new result that is reliable over time. And at some point, usually after 12 or more data points, when a community has really a new baseline, we would actually shift the median down as a way of saying, okay, you've got a new normal, and now you're trying to drive down even further below that. Again, a huge advantage over the way I think we've been thinking about data in the field. We've been doing really good point-in-time counts since, I want to say 2009. It's 2018. You need 12 data points just to understand natural variation in a system, right? So maybe 2 years from now, we would finally be able to say, are we really reducing homelessness across the country, or are we just seeing natural movement? I think this is a way of helping communities get much more frequent data points much more quickly so they can really answer those kinds of questions. Finally, and I know I'm probably over time here, we're just looking at inflow and outflow. On the top there, you're looking at a community's inflow into the system. And on the bottom there, you're looking at outflow in a community each month. So new people versus people we've moved out of the system. And any month where you see that square underneath light up red, it's just an indication to that community, hey, your inflow exceeded your outflow this month. So you're going backwards, right? You're losing ground. You got to call a meeting, look at this data, and figure out where folks might be coming from and how you might need to plug a gap upstream. So we're trying to shift to the kind of data platform that gives people signals that help them use the data for improvement over time. Okay, I am going to press pause, turn it back over to Megan, and say thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jake. So I'm going to share a little bit about the Away Home America Community Dashboard, and then we're going to open things up for a couple of questions. And what we want to offer you in this room is really a set of tools that you can consider using in your communities. In the case of the Community Dashboard, you can adapt this. It's free, and anybody can participate to start actually using data to implement equity. So Jasmine mentioned this in her remarks yesterday. This is a very tiny, I'm going to abuse PowerPoint for the next 5 minutes. This is a very tiny font, but it's all available on our website. Just look for the tab at the top that says Community Dashboard, and we are Away Home America, very easy to find. What you see here in the community dashboard is 17 communities currently who are volunteering to participate, to use this tool to understand how their homelessness system is functioning for young people, and in particular young people of color and LGBT youth and young adults. We're going to go into a couple of sections here, but I want to point out just in the big picture why this is so critical. One is that before we had tools like the community dashboard, every community was tracking data in slightly different ways. So it was like apples to kumquats, and it's very difficult to have a conversation about how communities might actually be functioning because the conversation is different in every single community. So to be totally fair, the community dashboard is like Braeburn apples to Honeycrisp apples. There's like still some variation, right? But we're like narrowing in on the apple varietal. And you can see a little bit more if you dig in how everybody is measuring their by name list, and the inclusion criteria is a little different still in each community. What this also allows us to do is visualize equity, and I'm going to talk about that middle bar in just a moment. In fact, let's do that now. Oh, but there's one other thing. So this also allows us to start having a conversation about what sort of resources we might want to scale up in a community. So if we understand by looking at our dashboard, gosh, we have a lot of young people that are exiting to market rate housing with a subsidy or to this particular type of housing model. And actually, there are a lot of young people of color that seem to be doing very well in that model. And that's most of the young people we have in this community. That's the thing we're going to want to scale. So this, not exclusively, but that's one of the things that we're going to want to scale. So let's talk about that a little more. So as a community is using the community dashboard, here's tangibly what that would actually mean for a community. One thing that they could do, and I'm just going to cook over here. You can't see the font, but on the very left there, it's taking a look at young people on the community's by name list, so young people waiting for housing who are LGBTQ, so queer youth. In the middle, it's looking at young people who are gender diverse, so gender non-conforming or trans youth. And on the right, it's looking at young people of color. Of course, there's lots of overlap between all of those categories. And the blue is young people who are on the list, the blue bar, and the red is young people actually getting access to housing. So that's not just housing programs, it could also be a young person that exits to a safe and stable destination with a family member in the community, and we hear about it and know about it and think, great. What a community may do with this data, if this is my community, I would say, gosh, we're looking at young people of color. They are 73% of young people waiting for housing that we have on our list right now, and they're less than half of the young people that we actually know are getting into our housing programs. So there is a disparity there that we need to address, and the dashboard really visualizes that in a way that can get to actually thinking about system changes and accountability for a community. So that's one way. And then you can go a little deeper. So if you go to the website, you can actually float over each one of the boxes and get more information about each category. This is the bottom right that's talking about where young people actually exit to. So the gray is moved to inactive or unknown, and the red are various housing destinations. So a community might look at, for instance, gosh, we've got a lot of young people that are moving to inactive or unknown in this community, and we want to take a look at if those young people are more likely to be queer or trans. Maybe they are. If they are, that could mean a few things. It could mean that queer and trans young people are rocking their social networks and they're finding other places to go and are not telling us about it. It could also mean that this system that we have today is not supporting queer and trans young people very well. And so they're floating off to any particular destination that's not an awesome destination. And that's a thing that we need to look more into. So the dashboard gives us actual tools to bring together community partners and say, this is what we're seeing. What does this mean? And what improvement might we want to make? It's a tool to start asking questions. This is some more really tiny font. But here's the point that I want to make with this. This is a list of all of the communities that we know of that are participating in a variety of data initiatives. The first column is the Away Home America Community Dashboard. The next is the many Coordinated Entry Learning Collaborative. Next to that are communities that will be piloting the criteria and benchmarks with USICH that Jasmine mentioned yesterday. And then communities who have done a 100-day challenge. And you'll notice some of you in this room, Hennepin County, Palm Beach County, there's a number of communities that have used these initiatives like building blocks, right, Palm Beach? Where, great, we did a 100-day challenge, well, we're already collecting that data, well, let's start doing the community dashboard, wonderful, let's pilot the criteria and benchmarks. So you can use all of these things as steps along the journey. The point that I want to make with this is if your community is not currently participating in any of those projects, there's ways to get involved. Talk to me about participating in the community dashboard, because this is the direction we are moving as a movement to understand how we're serving young people of color and queer and trans youth, and how we are making progress, actually, as Jake talked about, towards this goal of actually getting to an effective end to youth homelessness. This is a quote that some of you may have heard from colleague Mark Dones. Equity is something that you implement. It's not something that you pray for. And data is a way to implement equity. It's a way to actually hold your community accountable and start to identify some next steps towards equity. And I want to actually turn to fellow presenters with that and ask a few follow-up questions about some of our themes. And Jake, I'd love to start with you. I feel like we're kind of, it's very bad body language. Can we scoot up?
Should we just make a little closer circle?
Let's just be a little more intimate. So Jake talked about moving from program level data to system level data. And I want you to say just a few more things about why that's critical, in particular as we're thinking about how we implement equity in communities.
Gosh, yeah, well, I think a few of the things are things that you showed. I think, so we're moving, right now we have 15 Built for Zero communities that are starting to pilot tracking demographic data in this system, which we don't do right now, to help our team figure out the way to do that so that we can expand that to all the communities that we're working with. And I think one of the things that we are anticipating being able to see when we start to do that is that when you're just looking at program level data, you don't always know who's being left behind. You could see a program that's serving people really well or a number of programs that's serving people really well. But what it doesn't tell you is the universe of people that need access to that kind of service or that kind of resource. And so you don't actually have a sense of how many people you're leaving out. I think what we are likely to find when we have the ability to look at demographic data in these dashboards is that in a lot of our communities, the folks that are either stuck in inactive or experiencing lengthier times of homelessness are disproportionately people of color. And that's not data that we have the ability to look at right now. So I think that's one key thing when we think about implementing equity. I think the other thing is you want the ability to actually do something about it. And I think sometimes I feel frustrated that in our sector, we've been stuck for a long time in, not stuck is the wrong word, but focused on critique. And what I find is that sometimes it can feel so overwhelming that people start to feel like maybe there is an action that can be taken. And I think by being able to show in such a simple and kind of elegant way, okay, what's actually going on in our system, we're giving communities the tools to start to break down a very overwhelming problem into something that actually feels like you could see where you might begin to make entry points and highest leverage interventions in that system. So I guess that maybe those are a couple answers to your question.
Good. Yeah. And Alison and Josephine, you may have responses to that as well. Roll them into your responses to the next question, which is when communities across the country, when we have the results of the Youth Outcome Project, communities addressing youth homelessness across the country will have a common menu of youth outcomes to use. And when that's more consistent, in real terms, what is that going to allow us to do as a movement? What will be the impact of that?
Yeah, I think your comment about measuring kumquats to oranges versus Braeburns to Honeycrisp really applies here, is that in order for us to be able to measure the impact that we intend to have and be accountable to the young people, be accountable to the investments made in these interventions, we have to be able to be speaking from the same language. And the menu is not meant to be a cookie cutter or to dishonor individualized journeys and goals that young people are setting for themselves, but it is to say we have to be accountable to young people. So if Program A says we do employment, but their outcome measure is job readiness, and Program B says we do employment and we're all about $15 minimum employment opportunities, they're not speaking the same language. And so the menu is really a framework to say incremental progress is just as important as the endpoint, but as a system for us to be accountable to the young people and to be able to move the population of young people towards the goals that they've set for themselves, we need to do better about having the same common definitions and language when it comes to outcomes and measures.
Alison, anything to add to that?
I would just reiterate that not only having shared outcomes, but Josephine said this as well, is just having shared definitions. So we were talking about at lunch today, stable housing, for example. Everyone is defining that differently. And we all need to have a shared definition, because if you are a program saying I'm performing, 80% of our young people who leave our program, they're stably housed, but the definition doesn't, stably housed means also couch surfing, then you're going to have a different, you can't really compare that outcome to the other group who doesn't include couch surfing as stably housed. So that shared definition is really important so that we can have the same outcomes and we're then measuring them the same way too.
Okay. I know we're at time, so I want to do a lightning round of one sentence advice to folks in the room. So you were all fired up about data, I hope. You want to know what to do about it. So a sentence or two, literally, don't run on, about what your advice is for folks. And my response to that would be, if you are a young person in the room, it's part of a youth action board or in leadership in your community, I think young people have perhaps the greatest leverage to go back to systems and say, we need to be looking at data, and we need to be looking at data every month, and that needs to be meaningful, and it needs to make sense to you and to you and to you so that we can start making decisions. And that's a point you can bring to your community. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say if you're a person with lived experience, you are probably in the best position to understand where the gaps in your system's data collection are. So who are we not counting, who are we not finding? And so if you can find the person in your community who's responsible for maintaining an effort at system-wide data, it might be at the COC or it might be in the city or the county, ask for a meeting and see if they would sit down and walk you through it and share with them the places that you think they might be missing opportunities for data collection. I think that's insight that we don't see reflected in the systems we work in enough. So.
And advice for anybody, young people or?
Yeah, I think rightfully so, we're very focused right now on our ending homelessness outcomes and indicators, and Jake's slides really spoke to that. For young people, housing stability is the beginning of or the continuation of really great things. And so we should be thinking about how the data not only tells us about to what extent young people are being housed in our community, and like that should just be the beginning. And what other opportunities do we have for them to live their best selves and their fullest potentials related to the 4 core outcomes. So I would say go back home and start integrating that piece of conversation along with the housing stability conversation.
And we were also talking about this before our presentation, that sometimes young people are feeling like I'm not just a number, like I'm just a data point to you. Yeah. And I think we need to be more intentional about what data are, and also think about the importance of collecting that information from young people so that we as a system can then improve services, which ultimately helps young people have access to better services.
And that system should involve young people as leadership in that system, because we got to do it all together. Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thanks.